And most of the time, we get in our own way. We self-sabotage. We wait for permission. We avoid asking the questions that we need to ask to gain the clarity we need to move forward. All of this is just us getting our own way.
MindHack is a podcast about the psychology behind performance, behavior change, and self-optimization. Each episode explores how to think clearly, work smarter, and live intentionally through insightful conversations with leading entrepreneurs, scientists, and experts in human behavior. Hello, and welcome to the MindHack podcast, where today we're exploring the psychology behind building a better business and a meaningful life. I'm your host, Cody McLean, and with me today is Dr. Corey Wilks. Corey kicked off his career as a clinical psychologist dealing with tough stuff like addiction and therapy, but these days he's an executive coach working with entrepreneurs and creators. He helps them move past hidden mental roadblocks, things like imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and burnout that keep them from performing at their best. Corey's big thing is helping entrepreneurs drop someone else's version of success and define their own authentic version instead. He calls things like the lucrative misery trap and digs into why so many high achievers feel quietly miserable despite external success. We'll also unpack practical strategies for beating procrastination and burnout, explore the messy psychological realities faced by online creators, and discuss how confronting uncomfortable truths like your own mortality can become powerful motivators for meaningful change. By the end of our chat, you'll have actionable insights to identify and break down whatever psychological barriers are stopping you from building the business and life you actually want. Please welcome Dr. Corey Wilks. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
So you started out doing clinical psychology work. We're doing deep stuff like addiction and trauma, and now you're coaching high-performing entrepreneurs. And in that span of all that knowledge that you've gained, I'm wondering what's kind of the core psychological foundation that high achievers and entrepreneurs need to focus on getting right before they go into kind of advanced mindset tactics?
Most of the time, people know what they want, but either they're afraid to go after it or they're waiting for permission to do the thing. One of the most common questions I get either in, one-on-one coaching or when I do like group coaching stuff is, well, what do you think I should do? Or should I do this or that? And every single time my response is, what do you want to do? Because most of the time, you know what you want to do, but you're waiting for me or for somebody else to say, that sounds good. That's a good idea. You should do that. Because we've just kind of become conditioned, maybe societally, to wait for somebody else to tell us it's okay to do the thing we deeply want to do. So most of the time, that's what we continue to wait for. So you want to do the thing, this is the right decision for you, but for some reason you don't trust your own judgment to give yourself permission to take that action. So you constantly sit around and wait for somebody else to tell you that. The issue is nobody is sitting around waiting to give somebody else permission.
And so a lot of entrepreneurs stop because is it like a lack of self-confidence? Are they just seeking validation for this intuition that they have?
I think a lot of times, most of the time we get in our own way, right? Like we can talk about imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs and, shiny object syndrome, golden handcuffs, all this other stuff. All of these fundamentally boil down to we want to do a thing or achieve a thing, but then we get in our own way, our own thoughts, our own behaviors. We self-sabotage. We wait for permission, right? We avoid asking the questions that we need to ask to gain the clarity we need to move forward. All of this is just us getting our own way. So like as a coach, for example, right? My job fundamentally is to facilitate transformation. Whatever the transformation you want is, my job is to facilitate that. The majority of what I do is, okay, cool. Where do you want to go? What's holding you back? It's typically you. Cool. How are you getting your own way? Why are you getting in your own way? What do you need to do to get out of your own way? And there's a lot, like, we can go super deep into that, but fundamentally that's usually what it is. It's like, what is either the false assumptions you're operating off of about how the world is supposed to work, or what you're quote unquote supposed to do, or what you should do, or what are the beliefs you've been holding and carrying with you that no longer serve this current version of you, or don't serve the version of yourself you're trying to become. That's a lot of what this type of work boils down to. Is you're probably getting in your own way. How do you get out of your own way?
And now you grew up in rural Appalachia, and that doesn't scream future executive coach at the time. I'm wondering, have you kind of gone back and thought about how your background allowed you to be who you are today? Like how that impacted you?
Yes. So, I think fundamentally everybody wants to matter and feel that what they did mattered, right? Like we all want to feel like our life matters. The things that we're doing are meaningful to us. And once we're gone, or once we're at, the end of our life, we can look back and say, what I did was significant. What I did mattered. I fully lived. I didn't wait for someday to do all the things I wanted to do. I actually did those things. That you see a lot. You see it everywhere, but especially when you grow up poor, a lot of the times, everybody you see around you has a lot of limiting beliefs and has just a lot of barriers that they struggle with. So they want to do more. They want to live bigger, but everybody around them hasn't. So then you grow up sometimes with this belief of people like me can't do this. People like us don't do these things, either because we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we don't deserve it, or in some way we are unworthy of this type of success. And it's interesting because, like I said, grew up public housing, food stamps, the occasional church donation for like a Thanksgiving dinner or something. And I grew up in the US, and in a lot of places in the US, in like grade school, like high school and things, you have to pay for your lunch. I never had to pay for my lunch. I always got free lunches because, I was so poor, we got like a voucher or whatever. And I remember when I would, have friends or just know people who at the time were probably middle to maybe upper middle class, and they seemed just grossly wealthy compared to me and most of my friends. And a lot of the kids who would, sometimes pick on me, or the kids who were just, the kids that most people hated because it was like, you just had everything handed to you and you're super cocky about it. After, at a certain point, I had these weird assumptions and beliefs around wealth. But then after I, went into therapy, left therapy, got into coaching, and started working with, wealthy people and making friends who are wealthy, it was like, one of my goals is to become wealthy. But how can I become wealthy if I secretly hate wealthy people? Right? Like if I hate wealth because of my childhood experiences around wealthy people, because most of the ones I met were cocky assholes, how can I achieve this? Because I don't want to be like those people. Or like if I have kids and my kids grew up with resources, am I raising the same kids that I hated in high school? So like it was a real like weird, just mentally very weird thing to wrestle with. Thankfully, through the work that, I do online, whether it's coaching, writing, my podcast, whatever, I've been able to become really good friends with people who are quite wealthy, to see like, oh, being wealthy doesn't mean you have to be an asshole. Like the wealthiest people I know are the most humble, the most gracious, the most charitable, most giving people, the most present people. It's like, okay, cool. I don't hate wealth anymore. I don't hate wealthy people. I don't have a problem raising kids who are grown up in wealth, because I have now met too many people who are good people who just so happen to have money. So I think, and I think that narrative, that experience reigns, kind of resonates with a lot of other people who grew up similarly, but, poor, but want to achieve success. That is something you really have to learn how to navigate, is your own limiting beliefs and getting in your own way around success.
Yeah, I really resonate with that because, I grew up poor as well, partly in foster care. And people ask me, like, how did you become so successful? And I don't really have an easy answer. It's kind of like two-pronged. Number one is I was poor, but we moved to this little tiny area that happened to be within the school district of one of the richest high schools. It was the top 100 richest high schools in the country. And so every day on the school bus, we'd be passing by mansions that had helipads, kids being picked up in Ferraris and Mercedes. And I was this weird kid that just wanted to be liked, that I wanted to have friends. And I wasn't really able to get any of that. And so it kind of deeply ingrained into me that if I want to be liked and I want to fit in, I need to be successful too. And then I set off, I had this mission of I'm going to prove to these rich kids that I can be successful too. And I don't need my parents' money. And that was kind of what started off on this journey that set me on that where I am today. And the second thing was actually the fact that I had no backup plan. If I failed in my businesses to be successful, I couldn't go live in my parents' basement. I didn't have parents to live with, and so I was literally going to be homeless, or I was going to be a successful entrepreneur. And when your back is against the wall like that, then, you're just like blazing forward. And so I kind of theorize that the difference between, say, somebody who grows up poor and then wants to be success, because I think there's a difference between there's a thing of like, we want to want success, but you don't necessarily want to do the effort. Or you're trapped in this mindset that you're meant to be poor. And so you don't even start to envision the kind of person you could be. But I think if you're poor and you kind of have like a glimpse into, this is just one perspective. I'm curious your input on this, is like, if you have a glimpse of what success looks like, if you can kind of taste it, then that can slowly start to build up that fire within you of, I've got to do this. I can do this. I'm curious what you have to say about that.
We've all heard the cliche, you're the average of the 5 people you spend most time with. For me, going a little bit more nuance into that, when you meet people who are successful, it makes the possibility of success real and no longer theoretical, right? Because it's easy to grow up and like look at rich people, celebrities, you're like, oh, the Kardashians or all this person or all that person, but they're not real because you don't actually know them. So then it creates like this divide, right? Of like, well, it's here's where I am and people like me. And then there are people like them way over there. And there's this huge chasm, this gap I can't bridge. But once you actually meet people who have done it and you're like, oh, well, shit, they're not that smart. Or like, oh, like, they struggle with things too. Or like, oh, they have been able to make money and maintain their humility. It makes it real. It makes it concrete rather than this abstract theoretical thing that is for these other types of people who have some inhuman trait that you lack. That I think is the biggest thing that really helped me, is meeting actual successful entrepreneurs who did it. Because then it's like, oh, well, if they can do it, so can I.
And you veered into being a coach from being a psychologist. And I think you've said before that you kind of felt like you were boxed in by traditional therapy. And I think Maslow or Maslow's hierarchy kind of infers that like therapy, it usually stops at your baseline needs, at helping you resolve what emotional trauma you have. But coaching, the difference with coaching and therapy is that coaching kind of tackles that self-actualization bit about who you idealize a version of yourself could be.
So especially so the caveat with this is, if you're a private practice therapist in like Beverly Hills or somewhere, you can kind of do whatever you want. But most therapists, right? A therapist is a psychologist, counselor, social worker. Most therapists are getting paid through insurance. Okay, at least in the US. Insurance companies dictate what you can treat and for how long you can treat it oftentimes. So when I was doing therapy, I was working in rural Appalachia. So low SES, low socioeconomic status. A lot of people are on Medicaid specifically. Some people are on like a better private insurance, but everybody was on insurance. The issue with that, with therapy, is technically my job as a therapist is to help you become what's called subclinical, meaning to no longer warrant a diagnosis. So I could basically help you kind of get your head above water. So maybe you no longer warranted a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, single episode mild, but you were still kind of, low mood. You're still kind of like everything's kind of just shades of gray. Unless I can find a diagnosis to tack on, your insurance company be like, oh, they're fixed. So they don't need therapy anymore. We're not going to pay for it anymore. A lot of the people I worked with couldn't afford it out of pocket. So as soon as they became subclinical, they stopped coming to therapy. So that's fundamentally the difference between therapy and coaching. Is therapy, the role is to get you back to a baseline level of functioning. Coaching assumes that's where you start. And now we're trying to flourish to optimize, self-actualization. That's fundamentally the difference between therapy and coaching. People come to coaching because they want to get better from where they're already good. They want to become even better. People go to therapy because they're somehow bad and want to get up to good. It's broad strokes. Mm-hmm. Some people, again, private practice, you can I just want to talk about my childhood and figure this out. Okay. Couples therapy, sometimes it's we just want to get better. But most of the time you go to therapy to deal with a problem that you're wanting to get up to functioning. Coaching is buddy, I'm good. I just want to be great.
And so in when you're coaching, I assume, I could be wrong, that one of the biggest issues that you encounter is this huge concept that we've all heard of, of imposter syndrome, right? And it prevents people from even initiating the path towards becoming the person that they want to be. And I believe you talked about something called the self-concept inertia that kind of keeps people stuck in their old patterns. So can you talk a little bit about this concept and kind of what you see in general about some of the issues that people encounter?
Yeah, so that's something I wrote for Psychology Today. So the simple version is, until you can really, your self-image, your concept of who you are is going to limit you. Because anytime our beliefs and our behaviors are different, they're not aligned, it creates what's called cognitive dissonance. And all that means is you feel this angst, anxiety kind of friction anytime you're acting in a way that you feel goes counter to a belief or an identity that you have. Okay. This self-concept inertia is that. So basically, if you deep down you have this belief that you are unworthy, and then you engage in a behavior that you start to see success, you're like, wait, no. I'm unworthy. I don't deserve success. That can kind of lead you to self-sabotage, to come back to baseline of okay, cool. Yeah. See how I started to succeed and then something happened. I sabotaged it and then I didn't succeed. I failed. Now we're back to baseline because I am unworthy of success. Right. Or imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome fundamentally is a belief that you don't belong in the room, whatever that room is. So if you deep down believe you don't belong in that room, then you're not going to go in that room. Because if you try to go into that room, now you have this cognitive dissonance of, I don't belong here. My behavior, my belief don't align. So I need to not go into that room. Because as soon as I enter it, I'm oh, I'm a fraud. I don't belong here. And then you have all this weird, angst and stress and things around it. That's the self-concept inertia. So it's we get really hung up on all the hacks and the habits and here's how to do this, time block, Pomodoro, Eisenhower, all these other things. And they're all solid. But if fundamentally you're only focusing on your habits and you're never thinking about your identity and your own personal narrative, your own beliefs about who you are, what you deserve, what you're capable of, if you never deal with those, that is when you get into the situation of, all the hacks, you've developed all the habits, but you're still not getting the results you want. more than likely it is related to the fact that your identity hasn't evolved alongside your goals. And that is a big piece that's actually holding you back. Again, you are getting in your own way.
So what kind of psychological like fallacies or biases do you see people falling in terms of like these pitfalls that hold them back? So, we have imposter syndrome. Is that something that tends to start at the beginning, or is that something where they're starting to create some momentum for themselves and then eventually they either they fail at something, and then that's kind of like, maybe that's like a self affirmation or kind of like the self confirmation bias, where then their subconscious is still attached to that old identity. And it's like, see, you failed, you can't do this. And then they kind of go back and start unrolling that momentum that they create. Kind of what would you advise to somebody that's starting on this journey and that's encountering some of these mental roadblocks?
The simplest thing is find people who've already done it and really look at what their trajectory was, right? Like so for example, I'm working on a book right now and I've written for several years at this point. When I look at some of my favorite authors, it can be intimidating because I'm comparing my blog post that I spent 3 hours on to their best-selling book they spent 5 years on after they wrote for a decade. Like, of course, my single article sucks compared to their best-selling book. But if I'll use Ryan Holiday as an example, because we talked about him before the show. If I look at like The Obstacle Is the Way or, one of his newer books, his writing is infinitely better than mine on like a per article basis. But it's like, okay, well, let me look at his old blog articles from 10, 12, 15 years ago. Oh, okay. These aren't terrible, but they're nowhere near as good as his current writing. Right. Mm-hmm. So then I can be like, oh, let me compare where I currently am to the same stage he was at back in the day when he had been writing for 4 years. What did he look like? Right. And same thing with entrepreneurs, right? Like, don't compare yourself 3 months into somebody who's 13 years in. Compare yourself, like, look at them now, but say, where were they when they had only been in business for 3 months? Let me look there, because that lets you softly kind of see the trajectory of what is possible if you put in even a similar amount of effort that they did. Okay. So you're not comparing current you to current them. You're comparing current you to past them and then watching their trajectory. That makes it much more feasible. It makes it much more possible because now you have the belief, oh, this is possible. It isn't just the desire of, I want this to happen. It is the belief that goes with it of, this is possible for me to achieve. Because look at this other person, look what they did, look how they did it, right? And then a step beyond that is if you can actually get to know those people and befriend them and hang out with them and have candid conversations with them, then you're like, oh, this person isn't superhuman. They're not a super genius. They didn't have all these resources. They grind it out day in and day out. They're always trying to learn. They're always trying to, iterate. That is what led to their success. I can totally do that. Now I believe I'm capable. So now my behaviors start to align with that belief that I am capable and that this is the direction I feel I need to be going in.
Right. It's the example I think of is MKBHD, the popular tech reviewer YouTuber, that if you go back to his original videos, like he's like 13 or 14 years old and he's already doing these types of reviews. And obviously it's scaled up to a level of quality that is like unsurpassed by any other kind of tech reviewer on YouTube. And so it's really important to not get hung up on that perfectionism. And yet I know even when I'm creating content, I still get hung up on perfectionism. I know Mr. Beast was on Lex Fridman podcast, and he said that, if you're just getting started, you should just focus on creating, like, your goal should just be to create like 100 videos. Because in that sense, you're focusing on creating that habit, creating that momentum, because it's much more difficult to start off having that habit of being able to create that consistent content, because he knows, and so many people know, that you're going to be constantly questioning, is this good enough to go out into the world? And I think one of the biggest issues that we have is that feeling of judgment, right? You put something out there and you're afraid of somebody saying something negative about you. And it seems like all like the top influencers, there's so much negativity, you know, and so many YouTube comments and TikTok and Instagram comments. And yet, they just kind of keep pushing on. And I'm sure that there's some level of cognitive dissonance that they have to deal with whenever they get those negative feedback. But I think if you're just starting out and you get negative feedback, it's like 10 times more than if you're already a creator who's used to creating content. So if you're afraid of judgment, do you have anything else? Is it just focus on creating content and ignore the haters? Like, how do you get past that fear of being judged by others online?
One of my favorite quotes is from the late rapper Nipsey Hussle. And he says, "You will never be criticized by somebody who is doing more than you. You will only ever be criticized by somebody who is doing less than you." I have never once been legitimately criticized or somebody like tearing me down by somebody I would like to be more like, or I would like to befriend, or somebody who's even doing anything, right? Like, so a couple years ago, relatively early on in my own like sort of creator journey, I was on the Chris Williamson podcast. And Chris and I, Chris is super cool. This is like right before Chris had like Huberman on. So like Chris, I don't had like 200K subscribers. I was like, oh, this dude's a big fucking deal. And then he, blew up to what he is now. And on his podcast, we talked a lot about like limiting beliefs and fears and things. And I remember I was so excited. I was like, oh, this is like the biggest podcast I've been on, whatever. And so I looked in the comments, which you have to just be mentally prepared before you look in the comments section. Any time, because like it could mostly be good, but it's like if you're the kind of person that a single criticism, that's the one of the 15 or 100 comments, that's what's going to stick with you. You need to mentally brace yourself before you look at any of them. Most of the comments were super positive. People were like, oh, I've listened to this like multiple times. This is exactly what I need to hear. This is so good. Da, da, da. But then a couple people are like, this guy, every time he says a cuss word, he loses credibility. And I'm like, well, I'm glad I got a fuck ton of credibility then, because, who are you? And, other people are like, oh, they'll just give anybody a doctorate now if this guy's a psychologist. One guy was like, I didn't know Carl Urban had a degree in psychology, which Carl Urban, he's a sexy dude. Like, I was like, that's not the diss you think it is. But like, there were a handful of people who were just super shitty. And not giving like constructive feedback of like, hey man, you should work on your vocal tics, or like, hey, you say right or too much. That's constructive feedback, right? Right. My own vocal tic. But every single person who just was outright trying to talk shit, if you clicked on any of their profiles, they're anonymous, or they've never uploaded a video or anything like that. And for me, it comes back to like Theodore Roosevelt's Men of the Arena speech, right? It's like, it is easy to point your finger at somebody who's putting themselves and their ideas out into the world and say, oh, they shouldn't do this. Oh, that's stupid. It is like, that's easy. That takes no effort to like look at something and pick it apart. It is infinitely harder and more vulnerable and just exposing raw to actually you be the one putting yourself out there, you going on the podcast, you hitting publish on your article, you starting up your business, you doing whatever. That is so vulnerable, so raw, so real. And that naturally it provokes all of these fears, all of these insecurities, because you're doing something you, one, are emotionally invested in. You fundamentally give a shit about doing this thing, but also it's you going out and doing that. You're not hiding behind a company name. You're not hiding behind an anonymous account or whatever. It's you, your face, your voice, your ideas, your convictions out into the world. That is why we get imposter syndrome, because we're pushing our growth edges. We're doing something new, something meaningful, right? Nobody gets imposter syndrome about shit they don't care about. Like, you straight up don't get imposter syndrome if you don't care. So the fact that you're getting what most of us call imposter syndrome means you're doing something you care about. It means you are pushing yourself to grow and evolve, right? And that's the biggest thing for me, man, is like learning not just to identify all this is perfectionism, all this is imposter syndrome, all this is whatever, but really learning to like reframe, why is this happening and how could it be a good thing? Right? Oh, this imposter syndrome is kicking in because I'm entering a new room I've never been in. This is a sign I'm growing, right? Anytime somebody tears you down, they're not in your corner. The people who are in your corner will not ever try to tear you down. They may give you constructive feedback to help you grow, but they will never outright try to tear you down. So for me, anytime I get a comment, somebody's trying to tear me down, I'm like, you're not the person I'm talking to, right? And honestly, sometimes you kind of want to be hated by people, meaning there are some people that you don't want them to like you, right? Like, I don't want a fucking neo-Nazi to like me. Like, cool, you should hate me, right? Like 100%, if you're a neo-Nazi, you should hate me. I fully accept that, right? Like, I want to be hated by that, right? So that's the other thing is like, if you keep getting hate from people, are they maybe the people that you would want to hate you because fundamentally, philosophically, they're not the people you're trying to talk to, right? Or they are the people you actively are kind of battling against, right? Not that you should start controversy, but really looking at, I'm getting attacked. Am I getting attacked over something that I have high conviction is worth sharing despite this? Yes or no? That can go a long way. Yeah.
And for all you know, they hate you because they're jealous that you're putting this message out into the world and they're not. And there's something with, I once heard somebody say that success is becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so you're on the path that you should be on when you feel that imposter syndrome, when you question, like, am I as successful as I'm ever going to be? And you start having those worries, that anxiety, because that worry, that anxiety, that's simply your brain trying to protect you. It's trying to protect you from other people that might do something against you. But we're obviously in a society today where harmful stuff doesn't happen that often just because of ideology for the most part. And so you have to be able to push past those protection mechanisms that your brain has, because that's where you're going to find the success and that kind of self-actualized version of yourself that you're hoping to find.
Well, it's like, for me, life is about sacrifice. Like, a lot of people spend too much of their life trying to avoid making sacrifices. But it's like everything in life is a choice, which implies a sacrifice, right? So I can either sacrifice spending an extra 2 hours on the couch doing nothing in order to go to the gym, or I do the opposite. I sacrifice the opportunity to get a little bit stronger, uphold a commitment to myself for my physical health in order to spend an extra 2 hours on the couch, right? That's a sacrifice one way or the other. And I think that one, life is about sacrifice and learning to choose the sacrifices that are worthwhile to you. But it's also about embracing discomfort, because you can either embrace the discomfort of growth or accept the discomfort of stagnation. Right? A lot of people think that, I just need to avoid discomfort. That is how you live in mediocrity and then die filled with a bunch of regret over all the things you wanted to do, and could have done, but didn't, out of avoiding discomfort, out of fear, out of whatever. Right? But it's like, there's discomfort either way. So which discomfort is more worth it for you? The discomfort of growth or the discomfort of stagnation and knowing you're meant for more, but not going after it?
Yeah. And it's so, and then you have like the David Goggins who he said that, he wakes up and he runs every day. Everybody thinks he loves running, but no, he hates it. He absolutely hates running, but he does it because if he can run in the morning, then everything else he does that day is going to be significantly easier, because he has already proven to himself that he can do something hard. And when you are able to push yourself to do hard things, you become more comfortable doing harder things. And it's very rare that people on their deathbed, it's very rare to say things that they regretted doing. Most of them are things that they didn't do, right? Those chances that you didn't make, those decisions that you couldn't decide on. So I think there's overwhelming evidence that pushing yourself to do hard things when you don't want to do them is, that's the obstacle is the way, as Ryan, is famous for. So when you go from being able to push past these deeper limiting beliefs, then we kind of ask or go to, what does success mean? And I know you're big on building businesses kind of around core values rather than chasing money. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have made this mistake where they just chase money, they get money, and then they feel very empty. And so how do you help clients kind of find their kind of real, authentic version of success when they've spent so many years chasing somebody else's?
I think a lot of people think they know what their values are or their core value. I'm a fan of a core value over like multiple values just because it keeps it simpler. So for example, like my core value is freedom. Both the freedom to either be in pajama pants or gym shorts more days than not, right? Never having to wear khakis again because I hate wearing khakis. I had to wear them for my job. The freedom to be able to go downstairs and like make lunch with my fiance every day if I want, right? Rather than having to go to an office. But also the freedom to leverage what I've learned over the years to help other people succeed on their terms, right? So really looking at like, what is your core value and what does a life and a business align with that core value really look like for you? That's one piece. Sometimes people think they know what their values are, but then when you say, okay, explain it to me and explain what a life aligned with that looks like, that's when most people are like, well, shit, I can't. Like I thought I did, but I don't actually have clarity on what this actually looks like for me. So because of that, it's like trying to hit, it's not even like trying to hit a moving target. It's trying to hit a moving target in the dark. You don't even know what you're aiming at. You can't see it. And it is moving. Like it's constantly in flux. Of course you haven't achieved success because you don't know what success even means for you personally. So what most people do is they chase other people's definitions of success because it's just easier or they've never thought to question it. And either they achieve success and then it feels hollow because it wasn't their version of success, or in pursuit of somebody else's version of success, they burn out and give up and then get disheartened, right? Success isn't for me. Man, I've literally spent like 6 months before with coaching clients where every session, the question I opened with was, what do you want? Because it was that hard of a question. And not because they weren't self-aware, they weren't insightful, but it was that deep, that existential of a question of like, well, what do I want? Who am I at my core? What legacy am I trying to build and leave behind? What is meaningful work for me? What is the thing I would do if I never had to think about money again? What impact am I trying to have on the world? Like fundamentally, what do you want? Not what your parents told you, not what society, not what religion, not what whatever. What the fuck do you want? Everybody else aside. That seems like a really superficial question. But again, like I've worked with like serial super successful founders on just that question. And it took that long and longer sometimes because it's so much deeper than we think it is. But it's a question most of us never actually think about and like spend deep contemplative time journaling about, thinking about, meditating on, because it seems almost too simple.
Yeah, you remind me of a book called Second Mountain by David Brooks, who really eloquently showed that most of our lives, we tend to climb this first mountain, which is that fame, riches, glory, success. And a lot of us never are able to climb that mountain. But for those that do, then they realize how empty it is. And then they have to spend the rest of their lives trying to climb that second mountain, which is connection, family, friends, being part of a tribe, and knowing that you're having an impact on others in a meaningful way. And that can be one of the hardest things to do. And I think you've said before, you've written about lucrative misery, which I really love that, because it seems to kind of encapsulate how you can be successful, you can have the money and the status, but quietly you're miserable, and so you're clearly missing something in there. I'm curious, when you ask that question of what do you want, kind of what do people say?
Most of the time, if they're honest, they say, I don't know. And then that's what the rest of the coaching engagement is for. Other times, they will say, well, I want this. And this is just another thing, like just behind the scenes of coaching. Typically, whatever somebody comes to coaching with on like session 1, by session 4 or 6, we're doing completely different stuff. Because either the first thing wasn't the real thing they wanted to work on, or, and then they realized that and then changed, or the first thing was so simple and superficial, it didn't take very long. And they're like, oh, actually, this is a way deeper thing I want to work on. Right. So honestly, I don't really give a shit what people say they want to work on the first session, because like I know it isn't going to be the deep thing. So what do you want? They'll say, oh, I want this. It's like, okay, cool. How are you going to get that? We do it session or 2. They achieve it. They do it, whatever. And then they're like, that's not what I wanted at all. Okay, but now you know. What do you want? I don't know anymore. That's one. That's the second one. The third most common answer I get is they list out all the things they could do. They list out all the opportunities on the table, all the potential collaborations, all the ways, all the 3rd or 11th businesses they could create. And I'm like, I didn't ask what you could do. I asked, what do you want? And that is usually a lot harder to answer, because it's almost like we kind of deflect. We're like, oh, what do you want? Well, I could do this or I could do that. That wasn't my question. What do you want? Like because again, man, like we're waiting for permission a lot of times. We're waiting for permission to admit we want to do the thing. Because there's an authenticity and a level of vulnerability that is very uncomfortable for most people, for you to fully, unabashedly admit what you want. Most people have never really taken the time to think about that, let alone articulate it. It is easier to say, well, this is all the things I could do. These are all the things that would be fun to do. These are all the things that would work out because I have the skill set. That's never the question.
So if somebody feels stuck, despite maybe they look successful, maybe they have money, what's kind of step 1 to untangling what's actually off?
What do you mean?
Like if somebody feels stuck and they don't know what they want to do, what's next? How do they find that answer? Or is that kind of asking a question that, you only those can, like, you can only figure that out. It has to come from within. Is there no like single broad answer that can kind of encompass a question like that?
Yeah, that's definitely it's a good question. It's a very deep existential question that takes a lot of exploration per person. But in general, man, again, it kind of comes back to like, we want to matter and feel like what we did mattered. So I'm a big fan of the Stoic concept of memento mori. Remember death, remember you will die. Not in like a morbid or depressing sense, so much as using your mortality as a motivator to live fully. Kevin Kelly, he had written about advice from a friend, and this friend was like 65 or something. And his friend was like, in order for me to build anything to any measurable amount of success, it's going to take at least 5 years. So I measure my life in 5-year units. If I'm 65, I only have 3 units left, like being, hopefully. So of the 100 things I could do, I can only do 3 more things. What are those things? Right? What do I want to allocate these final units for? And I think that that's a very clarifying piece, because it's like, we like to glorify the hustle and the grind and say, oh, I worked 12 hours a day, 8 days a week or some shit. Okay. But of all the things you could do, what is going to be worth your life units that you are going to be required to invest to do this thing? What is worth not your hours, not your money, not your attention? What is worth your life to do, to build, to experiment and explore? Well, suddenly now all these low hanging fruits, all this superficial shit, you're like, well, that's not worth it. I've never thought about it in the terms of my mortality and what is worth my life to build. What is worth dedicating a unit of my life that I will never get back and that I cannot outsource to doing this next thing? What is, of all the things I could do, what is the next thing that is worth doing? That is one place I'm typically going to start with people, because it immediately cuts through a lot of the bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you can build a business around what you value, what is meaningful to you, or what tribe of people that you feel a connection to, I think that's going to be an infinitely much better business, rather than telling yourself that you're just going to work hard, you're going to get a lot of money, you're going to enjoy life later. Because more often than not, you live that life and you decide to retire, and then you realize that it's not really what it cracked out to be, that you go back into it. You feel like, your life's not over. And so being able to build this sustainable life path around what is meaningful to you, which is definitely a hard question to answer. That's like you kind of have to ask that for yourself, and everybody's answer is very individual. And it reminds me of the book, Die with Zero, where he mentioned this concept of I think, time buckets or life buckets, where you should draw a timeline of your life and then put in each kind of these little segments, could be in 5 years segments or 10 years, whatever. What do you want to do in that decade of your life? And have that be the map for the experiences and being able to live the life that you are not going to regret. But yeah.
And again, that kind of comes back to, what do you want? Like, what do you believe is aligned with your values that will matter to you on a day-to-day basis and will have mattered, hopefully, to the world? And that is worth your life units. Like, what do you want? Again, man, like, it seems like a super, like, stupid, simple, like, superficial question, but like, it goes really, really deep.
Mm. So say even after defining like what your version of success is, we still deal with burnout, with procrastination, with overwhelm. And you've said that procrastination has nothing to do with time management. It's all psychological. So I'm curious to know what's really underneath those you kind of chronically avoid key tasks.
The reason most people procrastinate, or really any self-sabotaging behavior that is holding them back from achieving their goal, because most of these people, like, you've memorized all the productivity hacks, you know how to do all the things. Yet despite knowing all these things, and maybe even putting some of them into practice, you're still self-sabotaging, you're still procrastinating. It's typically it comes down to fear avoidance. And what I mean by that is most people who procrastinate, they don't lack discipline. They're especially like with the people I work with, right? Like founders, entrepreneurs, content creators, things like that. They're plenty disciplined. They get plenty of shit done. So it isn't their procrastination. It isn't imposter syndrome. It isn't, perfectionism, whatever. They may have all of those, but they're still getting a lot done. It isn't a lack of discipline. It is an abundance of fear. The psychologists do this thing called a functional analysis. All it really is you look at a given behavior and you say, what function does it serve? What purpose does it have? If you struggle with procrastination, despite knowing all the productivity stuff, then most likely the function that procrastination serves for you is it helps you avoid risking one of your fears coming true. So for example, let's say, like with this podcast episode, let's say you are deeply afraid it isn't going to work, the podcast isn't going to work, or people are going to make fun of you or whatever. Fear of failure, fear of ridicule, something like that. the longer you procrastinate, not hitting publish, not booking guests, not getting the software up and going, not editing the episode, whatever, the longer you procrastinate doing all of that, the longer you get to put off risking that failure coming true or all of this judgment and ridicule coming true. So it isn't that you don't like discipline. It's that you have an overwhelming amount of fear, and the procrastination is helping you avoid these fears. That's the issue a lot of people actually struggle with when it comes to procrastination, is that really looking at what function is this procrastination serving right now? More often than not, it is fear avoidance.
Right. Procrastination could be looked at in some ways as an emotion where it's associated with some kind of fear that we're avoiding. And so then we might do what's called productive procrastination, right? Where we end up doing a bunch of busy work, but then so often, I know personally, like I would experience this at the end of the day where it's like, I got so much done, but none of it mattered. None of it was like the long-term stuff. That was like the most important stuff. And there's hacks you can memorize, like I know time blocking can work really well. Habit stacking, James Clear, having a really solid morning routine. Maybe you wake up and you dedicate the first 60 minutes of the day to writing. So there's so many different methods that you can work around that, but I don't know exactly what's exactly like, are these hacks? Are they just kind of band-aids? Or is there some deeper psychological work that you have to do, like meditation or reflection, on that negative feeling associated with the procrastination? Is that going to help you more in the long run, or are these other kind of habits or tricks like equally as helpful for somebody who is encountering chronic procrastination?
So we're almost seeing this movement, and I don't know if it is a new phase outright for the world, or more than likely just people getting a little bit older. Because like I'm 36, most of my friends are aging millennials and things. But I anyway have seen the shift of like post-productivity woo. So I'm seeing more and more of these people who were like, before were like hyper, all the productivity gurus, and like they were huge in productivity niches. They memorized all the things, they did all the things, they wrote books and created courses on all the things. But now almost all of them are like post-productivity, meaning they no longer are trying to optimize. They're trying to downshift. They're trying to slow down. Yeah. They're exploring woo-woo shit all of a sudden. And I think the biggest reason for this is productivity is a means to an end. But we've forgotten that. Now, too often over the last handful of years, we see productivity as the end in and of itself. So now people are like, my goal is to be more productive. Absolutely not. Your goal is to get the shit done you need to get done so you can live your life. But that stopped being the goal. The goal became, it's almost like, it's like a badge of honor of how much you got done that day, or how many things on your to-do list you got done, or how many, Pomodoro sessions you did today. And it's like, okay, but were you working on what needed to get done? Because I would rather, because sometimes this is, I'll do this in coaching stuff too, is like, of the 100 things you could do, what are the 3 things that you actually need to get done? Oh, but I got 100 things done. Okay, cool. You would have been better off to do the 2 or 3 things that actually mattered. The other 97 were just distractions or just performative productivity, right? Kind of like productivity equivalent, like virtue signaling. That became the goal, to be productive, not to live. So you're seeing the shift of people who for a decade or more were productive, and then they realized, I don't have anything real to show for that. I spent 10 years trying to be productive at the cost of living. I sacrificed actually being present and living and enjoying myself in order to aspire to this weird definition of productivity I had in my head. So I think that's why we're seeing this shift as well.
Yeah. Just last night, I had dinner with a founder here in Austin, and she confided in me how she's running this business, and yet she feels stuck in survival mode. and she's, I guess internally she sees herself as the successful businesswoman, and her whole identity is kind of wrapped up in being successful and kind of go. And now she's wanting to be a director and whatnot. And she finds it difficult to really like enjoy life. And that's something I resonate so much with, because I've been in that wheelhouse of, I had this mindset of, I'm going to work hard now in my 20s, work really, really hard. I'm not going to travel. I'm not going to do anything fun. I'm just going to work really, really hard and enjoy the fruits of my labor when I'm older. And we've been coming to terms to understand that that's not the perspective you should be living your life in. It's trying to balance that future self, the desire for that idealized version, with our present self. Because if you're living completely in that future version, then you're just going to be completely miserable your entire life. And so being able to balance that seems to be key. What advice do you have for somebody that is, say, like I myself, like I had this business, we had 1,000 employees, and I would feel like shit if I didn't get anything done, even though I had built the system, this great business with all these people that were effectively being productive for me, right? And making money for me. If I didn't do something that felt meaningful to me on that day, I would feel like crap. And that fact just astounded me. Like, so much of my own self-esteem was based on my output, and it's not like, do I have a great relationship? Am I having great travel? Am I having fun with friends? It's how productive I was that day. And it seems to be something that still so many high achievers are stuck in, this survival mode of your self-esteem is so heavily attached to what you can do. And I think that's been kind of ingrained in us, partly culturally, right? In this USA, this hustle culture, that's kind of like, at least it's kind of on its way out. But what advice do you have for me or even her that are stuck in this kind of survival mode and that identity that's so wrapped around work? Like, how do we separate that?
There's this sort of like tongue-in-cheek Zen proverb that goes something like, meditate for an hour a day unless you're too busy, then meditate for 2. And it's just this idea of like, we forget to live. We forget to be present. And anytime you feel this sense of, I'm too busy to live for myself, I'm too busy to kind of refill my own cup, that is precisely the moment you should drop everything and do that. The question I ask a lot is, what's the point? So for example, my office is upstairs in our house. It is too easy for me to work all day in my office and then go downstairs, make dinner, go to the gym, make dinner or whatever, and then sit on the couch with my fiance and we'll turn on TV, which is, evenings are supposed to be for us. So whether it's TV, taking a walk, whatever. It is too easy for me to, when we're on the couch, to pull up my laptop and work just a little bit longer. Or when we're out on a walk, to check LinkedIn or some shit just real quick. And then I'll look up and it's been 2 hours and I haven't been present. So it's like, what's the point? What's the point of working so hard and doing all this super hard shit when you're not present for the people who make life worth living? When you're not present in your own life, when you're not doing the shit that matters to you, being present with your loved ones, just enjoying walking around a park or your neighborhood, just literally like, do you enjoy existence? Can you actually do that or not? Because otherwise, what's the point? There are so many easier things you can do in life to make money than, especially being a founder, entrepreneur, doing all this shit. There are so many easier things you can do. Like when I had a regular job, I never took work home with me. Once I was off the clock, I didn't think about work at all. The clinic could have burned down overnight. I would not have cared as long as my salary check kept coming, because I would just get shuffled to another clinic, right? Didn't matter. Entrepreneurship, you're never off. You are always on. Your business is always on your mind. Period. That is one of the things you accept. Yes, maybe some people are really good at compartmentalizing. I haven't met them. Every single person I know, to some degree, your business is always on your mind, especially when part of your business is creating content in some fashion, because everything is content. Every sentence you say, every story you come across, every experience you have, you're like, I could turn this into something. This could be a solo podcast episode. This could be a LinkedIn post. Like it's been a newsletter thing. It could always be something. You're always on. So accepting that as a reality most of the time, the question is, what's the point? If you're not present, if you're not actually enjoying what you're doing and you're not allowing yourself to live outside of traditional work hours, what's the point? You could do easier shit, because we forget to live because we're so busy working, right? And yes, do what you love. I do not agree with the whole like, oh, do what you love, you never work a day in your life. You could absolutely love what you do. It's still fucking work. Like it is just work. Anybody who tells you otherwise is probably selling you something. It's work because it takes effort. Love what you do, but understand it is work. And understand the point of working is to live. So if you work and sacrifice living, you have missed the point.
Yeah. And as you know, as Viktor Frankl has kind of pointed out, is that if you're able to find a deeper meaning in the work that you do, it doesn't make the work necessarily easier, but it gives you that fire, that underlying reason as to why you should wake up every day and do that work, especially when it gets tough and hard to do and you wake up and you feel like you don't want to do it. Having that underlying meaning helps you on that path and continue on that path. And so having an identity formed around what we accomplish is one thing. And one of the other biggest issues that high achievers, entrepreneurs have is burnout. It's been rampant for so long now, and it's been getting worse by kind of every measure. And I think you said before that reflection is key when it comes to burnout. So what does real reflection look like when, say, you're feeling overwhelmed?
So burnout, specifically when it comes to like people who work for themselves, right? Most burnout stuff is geared toward like either employees or company owners on behalf of their employees, right? There's honestly not much on burnout that are targeted toward like founders, creator types. Because when you work for yourself, like I just said, you're always on. You don't really turn off. So how do you deal with burnout when you can't really turn off? Like you said, I have this, 5-step process I walk people through, but the third is reflection, which is the piece most people miss. So if you think about like, Benjamin Franklin was famous for like taking long walks to like have breakthroughs and things. Bill Gates would do his like think weeks where he'd like walden it up and like go to a cabin in the woods with a bunch of books and shit. Your best insights often come when you aren't in a reactive mental state. When you're constantly bouncing from putting out one fire to the next or responding to one email to the next, you're generally not going to have an epiphany because your brain is in a reactive mode. Versus if you can find a way to carve out time, to protect time, not find time, but protect time in order to reflect and cultivate stillness, that allows your mind to have the time and the space to calm down enough, like to have like the ripples in the water calm down enough for you to see clearly. So now you're in more of a proactive mindset. You're not playing catch up. You are ahead of things. You aren't chasing things. Your mind is going to be a lot calmer. That allows these insights, these eureka moments and things to finally kind of percolate up to the surface. That is something very, very many people who are deeply successful do, and something very, very few people, very, very many people who struggle don't do. Right? It's a rare quality in a lot of people because a lot of us feel that self-care is selfish. So taking time to myself, to be calm, to meditate, to relax, to journal, to just walk or just sit and think, that's selfish. Or it's wasteful. I had this conversation with an entrepreneur the other day. It was like, if I'm sitting doing nothing, I am wasting my time and wasting my potential. I have to feel a sense of productivity, because then that allows me to feel like I earned rest later. Rest isn't a reward. Rest is a requirement for peak performance. But a lot of people don't think of it that way. Doing nothing is some shit you can put on your calendar. It isn't wasting time. It's doing nothing. It is making time for yourself to read, to sit, to meditate, anything you want to put in that block. You don't have to do something specifically in order for that to be time well spent. And that's what trips up a lot of people, because it's like, well, if I sit here and I think, I'm wasting time. I could be doing something else. But that mindset, getting in your own way, prevents so many people from having the breakthrough they deeply need to have.
Right. It's that default mode network that we end up getting stuck in, right? That where we're always looking at what do we have to do, what's next. Our prefrontal cortex is just kind of online. And so often, as pulling up Ryan Holiday again, his book Stillness is the Key kind of goes into that, on how so many influential people in history had so much spare time, and they hardly ever worked, honestly, because when they did work, it was maybe a few hours a day. Huberman said that we tend to, to max out our focus at 90-minute blocks, and then you should take a rest in between. And so often we skip that because, again, it goes back to the identities being so built on what our output is, and this desire of everybody's passing me by. I have to work really, really hard, and then you burn out, and then you feel even worse. You feel guilty because now you can't even motivate yourself. Like, the part of your brain wants to work, but there's no emotional salience, the ability to kind of put weight behind the tasks to be able to do them. And you just feel miserable. And so I know one of my core routines is just a 20-minute meditation. Huberman's mentioned NSDR, non-sleep deep rest, a lot. And so having some part of your day as like a daily habit where you're not thinking, you're maybe thinking, but you have stillness where you're not trying to do something, because that's where you tend to get those really brilliant ideas. That's why we get so many ideas in the shower, right? Because we don't have any external stimuli that's directing our attention. And we don't really realize that when we're bored and we pull out that phone and we look at that app and we start scrolling, that is an opportunity for us to figure out what's bubbling underneath the surface. And so often now we're losing that connection with our internal sense of selves. And maybe that's why psychedelics has become more prominent, because people would rather take a substance to connect with their inner selves than just take 20 minutes a day to just sit with their thoughts, right? I think that there was some famous study a long time ago where they had people in a room by themselves, and they could either choose to just sit there, or there was a button in front of them that they pressed that button, it would shock them. And more participants chose to shock themselves rather than just sit there and do nothing. So
it's one of those things, man. We don't know how to be bored. Neil Gaiman, part of his writing routine he's talked about before is he'll just he'll go to a cabin or something with a notebook and a pen. And he's like, I don't have to write. I'm allowed to not write, but I'm not allowed to do anything else. Mm-hmm. So he embraces boredom. So then naturally, because sometimes if he makes the task of I need to write something right now, then your brain's I don't know what to say. First, if it's just I'm just going to be bored, brain, do what you want to do. Eventually your brain is going to entertain itself, right? So that's part of his creative process, is his brain comes up with stories and shit to entertain him, and then he just writes them down sometimes. But also for us, like you said, the shower thoughts kind of thing. In the shower, on a routine long drive, like a drive to 30, 45 minute commute, and at bedtime, is when people's minds tend to wander the most, because those are the only times you're not distracted throughout the day. Like if you really think about it, most people, we spend our entire waking hours going from one distraction to the next, one thing that requires our focus and attention to the next. Very, very few of us intentionally protect time that doesn't allow distractions and anything else tugging at our attention. But if you do, it can be legitimately transformational.
No. Now, kind of asking or moving to, I know that you worked a lot with online creators, and you ended up creating something called the Creator Alchemy. So what kind of work do you do with creators? What kind of problems do you see them having?
Yeah. So sort of the main quote unquote brand I operate off of with like my newsletter, my YouTube channel, my podcast and things is Creator Alchemy. And fundamentally, it's alchemy philosophically is about transformation, right? Kind of realizing the potential we all have. So I mostly deal with creators. Creator defined as anybody who creates things. It isn't, most people are like, oh, I'm not a creator because I'm not an Instagram influencer. I'm like, I don't give a shit about influencers, right? Founders, entrepreneurs, podcasters, things like that. Authors, they're all creators in my book because you create something in order to make the world a better place. That is a creator to me. Hence Creator Alchemy, helping creators transform themselves and their lives, their businesses, all that. A lot of the work I do is one-on-one, is private coaching. One creator I worked with who's like publicly talked that we worked together is Abdaal. New York Times bestselling author, big, productivity YouTuber things, 5+ 6 million views or subscribers, whatever. Always super cool. But I don't work with a whole lot of people privately because I try to keep my schedule pretty open. So in order to make the things that I talk about a lot more accessible to people, I started the Creator Alchemy Lab, which is just like my online membership community. We do like a bunch of like group coaching every month. We do monthly themed workshops. There's like a community itself of other creators doing really, really cool things, podcasts, newsletters, their own businesses, that kind of thing. It's super, super fun. It's basically just like, the age of AI, content is less of a moat versus community now, right? Like people want to connect with other people. And on this journey, like we've talked throughout this episode, it can be really lonely. It can feel really isolating. It's really easy to think like, well, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I'm not the kind of person who can do this. I was lucky early on when I came online as a creator to meet a handful of people who kind of took me under their wing. We became friends, and they made success feel real, that I could achieve it. But that's not the common story for a lot of people. So I wanted to create a space that facilitates that for others, of like, look, come join this. You'll meet people like you. You'll get group coaching with me. You'll get a bunch of other really cool things. Just join here. Especially if private coaching isn't where you're at right now, this community's for you. That's the big thing with the Creator Alchemy Lab. Because a big thing we do a little bit differently. Yes, we talk about business strategies and tactics. We talk about, to a degree, audience growth and creativity and things like the normal stuff. But for me, after you've read a couple business books, you pretty much have everything you need. After you've taken one or two people's courses on almost any topic, audience growth, newsletter growth, whatever, you probably heard it all before. After that, very few people are really talking about the psychology of what it means to succeed as a creator, navigating burnout, imposter syndrome. How do you actually embrace your own authenticity and leverage that to build a values-aligned business and life? That's more so what we focus on. We kind of say it's 80% personal development, 20% business tactics. That's my latest project. Yeah.
And it can be difficult to, I remember encountering one creator who said that he actually will record his videos and give it to a friend to upload. So he doesn't even have the opportunity to say, look at the YouTube stats. because I know one of the biggest issues is you can get really hung up on, if you get 5,000 likes on a video, then, next time you have to get 6,000 likes. And if you don't get that, then you start questioning what's going on. And am I doing it right? Should I be doing something else? And you might stop. And a few months ago, there was this thing where you had these really online prominent creators with millions of followers kind of quitting or pausing. I remember Tom Scott being one of them. And MKBHD came out with a video where he talked about this. And I love the analogy that he used at the end, because content creation can be this wild beast where once you get it going, then you become kind of like an owner operator business, right? Where not only do you have a business, but it's surrounding on you. So you can't travel, you can't take time off because you're so focused on needing to create that next video to satisfy the needs of your audience, or else you might lose them. And I love the analogy that he used, which was like that you looked at, like, as a content creator, like you're like an octopus and you have all these tentacles. And when you start out, maybe you're having to do the thumbnail, you're having to edit the audio and video together. And then as you start to grow, you can start cutting off these tentacles and give them to somebody else. Somebody else, maybe they enjoy creating thumbnails, right? And now you don't have to do that. But ultimately, you can't cut off all the tentacles. You have to find like a core, maybe 3 or 4 of those things that you really still love to do, and then keep doing them. You can't delegate or outsource them. So I assume that a lot of the issue that you encounter with creators is this, like the momentum of how to keep going, how not to burn out. Like, do you have any kind of generalized advice on how to sustain like this level of content creation when things are so competitive now?
So I think it depends on the level you're at. So I will talk at the level of you're at like 100K or more, right? Because at that point, audience capture becomes a pretty prominent thing. Audience capture typically defined as you have attracted a specific type of audience in a given niche or a given, 3 buckets within a niche. And now you feel pressure to placate that audience you have now attracted. You have captured an audience, but your audience has also kind of captured you, sort of a deal. At its worst, audience capture can turn into you kind of becoming a caricature of yourself. So examples some of these people give is like this kid, well, he's not a kid anymore, I'm assuming, but Avocado or some shit. He was a kid who like started off as like a skinny vegan kid and then did random videos and then started doing like mukbang or some shit, like binge eating videos. And then he got one video like went super viral. So then he's like, I'll do more of this because clearly this works. And then he became like hella obese from just doing these grotesque eating videos. Somebody told me he recently like took back control of his health and like went back and like got healthy again, which is awesome for him if that's true. But that's an example of, well, I'll give the algorithm what it wants. I'll double down on what works. That's what we're told. Or, you would have even seen like Jordan Peterson slowly kind of moving further right, versus before he was a little more centered and he would kind of criticize both sides. But over time, the right leaning members of his audience were more engaged. So then it just kind of, and other reasons, he just kind of slowly moved over. Those are examples of audience capture. Mark Manson recently put out a video talking about how he was completely basically burning his podcast. Despite it being really successful. He was like, I don't want to do that anymore. Audience capture starting to kind of creep in. I started, there were a couple of times where I would have guests on that I didn't really care for. And I just kind of had to sit there and like do it anyway because we had a sponsor or this or that. He was like, and I feel like that was coming across on camera. So I'm only going to upload when I want. And I'm going to do like super deep dive, all encompassing episodes on a given topic now. Even Tim Ferriss, he's like, I don't want to do book tour authors anymore because they're all just saying the same shit on all the podcasts that go on. I no longer want to do that. I am burning out doing that. So I think people who have survived, again, Tim Ferriss, Mark Manson, that kind of thing, they have said, I am going to resist audience capture at my level and accept that I'm going to be leaving money on the table. I'm going to be leaving growth on the table. And I could even go backward for a while. But this is what I need to put out content I have high conviction in, because if I burn out, the content stops. So it's, kind of like Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett talk about, like, rather than trying to be brilliant, just avoid stupidity. So rather than trying to like be super successful, avoid the things that are going to guarantee failure. Like, that's the starting point. So I think that's a big piece, is also understanding fundamentally, people don't follow you for your content. They follow you for you. Because no matter how niche you are, no matter how, whatever you're in, there's probably somebody else saying similar things. It's not the content itself. People follow you for you. Not everybody will follow you if you change, but if you don't change, if you don't allow your content to change, even though you personally have, your interests have changed, your whatever have changed, if you don't allow your business to grow with you and fossilize, that is how you burn out. You, especially as a creator, your content is allowed to evolve with you. Your business is allowed to evolve with you, because your name is what made your content, is what made your business, right? Most of the time, your name becomes a stamp of approval, or a quality stamp almost, on anything that you do. Understanding you are the core value prop of everything that you do, that's the real big piece. So it's like, you're allowed to evolve, but there's a lot of pressure to not evolve. And that's when you see creators, they identify the 12 topics or 12 videos that do really, really well. And they shit out the same 12 videos every quarter, 4 times a year. And it's like, it's the same type of video over and over and over again for 2025, for 2026, for spring, it's the same thing over and over again. And when you talk to them, they're like, I'm burnt out, but this brings in money. This is guaranteed. And what almost every single one of them do, they start a second channel, they start a personal Substack, they do something else to get more of that creative energy back.
Yeah, you kind of typecast yourself in a way, and you're afraid to experiment or do anything else because you know that you've captured an audience that are interested in one specific, very niche type of thing. And if you try to do something else, you're afraid that it's just not going to resonate with them. And then you might feel like, what if you're a one-hit wonder, all of those negative thoughts that go through your head. And I know you brought up Kevin Kelly earlier, and I think he said about having, capturing those 1,000 true fans, being able to just care about having some people who really believe in your authentic self, because you have the paradox of that the paradox between authenticity and the identity capture, like the identity that you come across to an audience of a channel that you formed. And yeah, if you go down that path, then you're just kind of torturing yourself, and you're going to end up burned out and feeling like, why am I doing this? And you're just going to kind of hate life to some extent. So yeah, very important to be able to maintain that level of authenticity with who you are as a person, and not let yourself play that game or get wrapped up too much in, what are the stats, and being able to how many fans and followers do I have? Yeah.
The other thing is, like, there are a handful of people that I think have allowed themselves to evolve really well and continue to see successes and also just enjoy their life. Nat Eliason is one. Currently, people would probably describe Nat as an author because that's what he's currently really working on. But like, Nat has done like coding. He had like an app with like teaching Kegels to guys or some kind of shit. Nat has done all kinds of weird shit in like over an 8-year plus span, just in the most recent 8-year span. He had a crypto project, like a big like crypto game project with tokens and shit, made millions, lost millions, wrote a nonfiction book, Crypto Confidential, on it, then decided to self-publish fiction books. Husk just came out as his first like fiction book. He's got a community for like how to build your own apps and shit. Nat kind of does whatever he wants, and people continue to follow him. And Nat even talked about it. He's like, look, I have, a newsletter of like 40,000+ subscribers, but none of them followed me for my fiction writing because I just started fiction writing. right? Dan Coe, another great example. Dan Coe does whatever the fuck Dan Coe wants. Like if Dan came out with shoes tomorrow, everybody's like, oh, it's Dan Coe. Of course he came out with shoes. Dan went from like web design to copywriting to, you know, online writing to now he's building his own like software and things. There are a handful of people who have allowed Tim Stoddard. Tim, he was on Starter Story that did a thing with him. Tim grew a handful of agencies and database-based agencies and things, and then sold them. And then he taught copywriting, but now he kind of does whatever he wants. And people follow those guys for them. Their content's great, but what makes their content great is their story, their experiences. None of them are easy to describe. None of them are niched at this point. And I think that's the thing is like, you can start niche if you want. It's definitely easier and simpler for people to understand who you are and what you do. But if pigeonholing yourself in your niche is burning you out, you're not required to stay in this niche the rest of your life.
Very, very well said. I love that, and it's amazing how much he's able to jump from one thing to another thing. Just it seems so effortless in a way. And another friend I have, Nick Gray, who seems to be doing that very well as well. Like he has a huge following, and he just kind of posts whatever he wants. And it can be like for a while we ended up we even had a dating salon at my house. We had a bunch of people over, and because there was like a last year he was very interested in wanting to have a relationship and finally have a girlfriend. And so he focused so hard on that. And all of his content was focused around like, how do you find the right person? And he even went to Tokyo, and he went on this blind date with some random girl that he met who connected on social media. And then he blogged about or talked about the entire experience. And that went viral. And so now he's been able to find some kind of relationship. And so it seems interesting that you just got engaged. Yeah, true. And so it's fascinating how you can have your interests and you can still have a following. And so I think that's important to note. And there's an increasing number of examples where you have people that have a variety of interests and they're able to talk about that freely. And I think that's a beautiful place to operate in. And I can hope that anybody is able to step up and be able to operate from a place like that.
Matthew McConaughey, I don't remember if it was on Ryan Holiday's show or not, or somebody else, but McConaughey was talking about social media. And because I think he's got a kid. He was talking about a teenager. I think it's his kid. I could be wrong. But it was like, don't create content for social media. Live your life and share what you're doing. And I think that is a really key just mindset shift, because it's really easy to get caught up in, I have to create something from scratch for LinkedIn, for Twitter, for Instagram. And then you put all this creative energy into that versus saying, let me live my life. Let me run my business. Let me do whatever. And then share what I'm doing along the way. That is a fundamental shift, I feel. And Gary Vee, he talked about a similar thing of document, don't create. Like just document what you're already doing in day-to-day life. And I think all the people we've talked about so far, that is a lot of what they did and what they continue to do. They live their life and then share lessons learned, behind the scenes, whatever. Versus people who are influencers. They're not living life. They're creating within this predefined box for this social media platform, but they're not doing anything outside of that platform. I think that's a key piece as well that allows you to evolve and take some of that pressure off as well to be a specific thing or in a specific niche.
And on that note, I think that's a great point to end on. So Dr. Corey Wilks, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. And if you were listening or you found yourself kind of nodding along, remember that you're not alone. Every entrepreneur, every creator, frankly, every human deals with a lot of these challenges. I think as Corey showed us, having awareness, stillness, maybe even having the right coach is a powerful first step to helping you have that level of self-actualization that you really want. And so for more of Corey's work, including articles on human flourishing and practical resources and even his community, check out his column in Psychology Today, or you can visit his website at corywilks.com. And of course, we'll have all that info in the show notes. So as always, thank you for joining me today. And if this conversation resonated, please take a moment, subscribe, share the episode, leave a review, all that fun stuff. Anyway, I'm Cody McLean. And until next time, keep hacking your mind, build intentionally, and pursuing the life you genuinely want. Thank you.